Hi there. This is 21 and 21, rapid-fire Q&A show filmed at Presidio Bitcoin, the Bay Area's first Bitcoin co-working and event space. I'm Haley Berkoe, and I ask visitors who stop by the space 21 questions in 21 minutes. We do our best to get through them all, but it's okay if we don't. Our guest today is Pierre Rochard, VP of Research at Riot Platforms and co-founder of the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. So, when I hit this stop clock over here, 21 minutes, 21 questions.
All right.
It's go time once I hit. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Let's do this. So, what brings you to Presidio Bitcoin?
Well, it's kind of the grand opening yesterday. So we got to hear from some amazing speakers. I mean, seeing like Jack Dorsey and David as well, David Marcus from Lightspark on stage with Alex Gladstein talking about Bitcoin and payments and Lightning. It's for me, that's a really special thing. It's something I've worked on a lot, and they are definitely on point of knowing what's going on in the world with that. So it's a great experience. And I also think it's super important to have real world spaces for Bitcoin, which has been derided as like a virtual currency that's only used by hackers in their parents' basement. And so actually seeing that there's real legitimate people involved in it, I think that's really important.
What are you working on right now?
Right now, I'm working on what we might call institutional adoption, which is probably like, it sounds bizarre because Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper is like, hey, let's have a financial system without institutions, without trusted third parties. And I think that as we've grown with Bitcoin over the past 16 years, we've learned a lot about how it interacts with the real world, how it interacts with humans. And I think that there actually is a place for financial institutions in Bitcoin and for governments in Bitcoin. And so in Texas, we're working on a strategic Bitcoin reserve. There's one at the federal level as well. And we're seeing more and more what we might call the securitization of Bitcoin, of putting Bitcoin into TradFi wrappers. And that's something that I'm watching closely and learning about.
Why do you think that this is important to Bitcoin's future?
So I think it's all about, it goes back to the scaling debate. I think the scaling debate's like the biggest, or one of the biggest debates in acrimonious, has caused like forks and all of this. So the way I see it is that Bitcoin has two fundamental utilities, we might call them, payments and savings. So payments, transactional, moving money around, savings, holding money, and that there's been a lot of cultural tension between these of is Bitcoin just digital gold, or like is it going to fulfill its full promise of electronic cash that you use day to day? And as I've thought about it during my decade in Bitcoin, I've always been all of the above, and with depending on what actually is getting traction. And I think that I worked as a product manager at Kraken, and so I read a lot of product books. So now I have like a product mindset of like, what are users actually interested in, and not fighting users, but building tools for them to make their lives easier and solve real problems. And so when we look at, for example, Bitcoin custody, there's a lot of people that are really nervous about holding their own keys. They don't want that responsibility. When we look at the Bitcoin price volatility, there's a lot of people who they like Bitcoin conceptually. They think it's good for the world, but it's just too volatile for them. They can't stomach the price risk. And then you have on the other end, you have people who they like Bitcoin, but they actually want more risk. And historically, they go for like altcoins and all these other things where they want to like get rich quick, let's say, and to take more risk to try to outperform Bitcoin. So the way I see securitization and financial institutions adopting Bitcoin and governments adopting Bitcoin is solving a real problem, which is that there are people who need intermediaries between them and Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is like this monetary backbone system. And it's almost like asking somebody to like directly connect to a high voltage electrical line with their iPhone USB plug. It's like, no, you need some transformers in between this high energy system and kind of the consumer app. I think it's super challenging for Bitcoiners because we're we like risk, first of all. Like, we're all younger, like, volatility, like, who cares? And so we can't relate to that. We lack empathy for those folks. Also, we're tech savvy, and so for us, like, private keys, it's like, yeah, that's just like that's data, and you can put that into a mnemonic phrase, and for us, it's tangible in the same way that a bar of gold is. But for anybody else, it's like it's magic. It's and magic internet money, right? And so they can't grok it, and that's why I think that, like, there's been one of the challenges of going mainstream has been building products that actually appeal to the mainstream.
You touched on the volatility aspect a little bit, but yes, Bitcoin's definitely volatile. How do you think that we can get people using Bitcoin more as a currency despite the volatility?
So I think that ultimately it comes down to double coincidence of wants. So one person has Bitcoin on their balance sheet already. They already hold it. They already have a wallet. The other person already has Bitcoin, already has a wallet. And at that point, they can send Bitcoin back and forth between each other. But if one end of that is missing, then they're going to have to convert into their local currency, and they're going to have a conversion cost. And then it's like, okay, why didn't we just use the local currency, which is what we've always been using? And so I almost see the flourishing of payments is going to be perhaps the last step in Bitcoin adoption. And the way we get there is by gradually having more and more people, holding Bitcoin, and that when that reaches, let's say, 100% adoption, Bitcoin won't have any volatility anymore because, everybody's already got it. So there's not like these animal spirits of people all trying to buy it at the same time and all panic selling it at the same time. What
are you currently most excited about in Bitcoin?
Currently most excited about, I think that as I mentioned, the securitization aspect of it, getting into capital markets. But also, I think that for me, what's really interesting is the Bitcoin education part that comes with that, because there's lots of people who have only gotten their Bitcoin education from, say, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. And that has actually been a very biased perspective on Bitcoin, where they haven't really heard the full story of Bitcoin. And so when for example, I got to testify in front of the Texas Senate, I was able to present a case for Bitcoin that is something that those senators have never heard about before. And so I think that even if they don't pass the law or whatever, they have learned about Bitcoin such that when they go back to their communities, where they're obviously very influential since they got elected, they're able to share a different perspective on Bitcoin than what you would see in the mainstream media. So I see the institutional adoption as like a great educational Trojan horse of sorts to get more of the Bitcoin ethos out there. And it's something that we don't have to necessarily like compromise on. I think that's like something people worry about, is like, do we have to dilute the message in order to appeal to these folks? And it turns out not. It's funny because when the hearing opened, it was with the chairman of the committee. And so, he's a state senator, and he starts talking about how the dollar is eventually going to go to zero, so we need an alternative. And this is stuff that, when we were saying it 10 years ago, was like, okay, you're a paranoid libertarian, like, you need to put your tinfoil hat on. But here it's like the state senator saying it, and he's not saying it of like, oh, Bitcoin's just digital gold, it's not a currency. No, he was putting it front and center that this is an alternative currency that is decentralized, that is like a backup system for when the primary currency fails. And I think that was just astonishing to hear from a public official.
So speaking of failure, let's fast forward to a grim future, and Bitcoin has failed. How do you think that it failed?
I think it failed because there was an EMP attack that wiped out electronics throughout the world, and that we've returned to kind of state of nature. So and I think that's the beauty of Bitcoin's decentralization. Is like, that's literally what you got to do to make Bitcoin fail. That's the failure scenario I have, unfortunately.
What do you think that we can do to mitigate that risk?
Yeah, so I think that it comes down to the fact that we have to be engaged citizens. So I think that there's a temptation with Bitcoin of saying, oh, it's inevitable. I don't need to do anything. I'm just going to sit on my hardware wallet now. But the reality is that we can go out there and we can change what happens in the world. And so, this most recent election, whatever you think of Trump or whatever, the reality is that the Bitcoin voters were the swing voters in some very key parts. Like Senator Bernie Moreno in Ohio, who replaced Sherrod Brown, who was like terrible anti-Bitcoin. But all this to say that I think Trump lowers the risk of a nuclear attack, so I think that's good. But it's just like that's where it's almost like, yeah, you got to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty of getting involved in public policy and lobbying and education and contributing to campaigns where it's like, I don't agree with 100% of what someone's saying, but we don't live in a perfect world. And so that's where you kind of have to find a way to have an impact without, to prevent nuclear war, but also, yeah, in general.
What's your most controversial Bitcoin opinion?
Wow. I think my most controversial Bitcoin opinion is on this topic called the security budget. And so it's this concept that as Bitcoin has these halvings, the Bitcoin miners are getting rewarded less and less. And that there's this perception that makes Bitcoin less and less secure and that it undermines transaction finality. I don't think that's true. I think that the subsidy, the new Bitcoin being created, the only, when we look at it in the white paper, I think Satoshi actually describes it really well, which is that he's hijacking the proof of work system and inserting okay, we're going to add units to this ledger through this process, even though it's like a separate thing, because that's the fairest way to introduce the currency into circulation. And then the transaction finality or the security of the network, I see that as very anti-fragile. So basically being the case that we don't have to have high transaction fees to prevent a 51% attack from happening. Rather, when a 51% attack happens, we will have high transaction fees because people will be getting censored and they will bid up their transaction fees in the mempool. And so it's like the security budget it shouldn't be something that we're wasting money on trying to prevent something from happening. Rather, it's something that's dynamic and anti-fragile. I've tried to get this perspective out there, but there's a lot of, I think there's, especially among the critics of Bitcoin, who are like, Bitcoin needs to hard fork or soft fork and add more opcodes in order to have more utility so that there's more transactions, so there's more transaction fees, so that Bitcoin's more secure. And it's like, that's like this refrain that I've heard for the past decade where I'm like, I just reject that entirely.
What's your perfect Sunday?
Perfect Sunday is certainly spent with my wife and 3 children in our backyard on the bouncy castle. That's perfect Sunday, yes.
Permanent bouncy castle?
I wish it was permanent, but it does depreciate over time, and so we've had to replace it a few times. But yeah, I think that it's really important to have a bouncy castle in your house or, in your backyard if you got kids, because they've got a lot of energy.
What's your dream project that you would love to see Bitcoiners build?
So this is getting built, but basically having it so that there's one piece of software, Bitcoin Core, Bitcoin QT, whatever you want to call it, that the reference implementation of Bitcoin, where you run a node and it's got an embedded hardware wallet, or it's got a wallet adjacent to the node attached to it, and you can plug in hardware wallets and they just work with the Bitcoin Core software, and then you can set up a multi-sig that degrades over time. So saying that, okay, this is going to start out as 4 of 5, but then after 6 months, it's going to be 3 of 4, and then after 6 months. So that, I think, would be like the perfect security model from the point of view of minimizing the attack surface by just having one piece of software that it's got lots of eyeballs on, and then having the ability to use different hardware wallet vendors so that you kind of remove a lot of supply chain risk around hardware wallets, and then the time locking aspect of it so that if you lose a hardware wallet, it's not the end of the world. You've just got to wait a little longer than you want to.
What do you think the best ways are that companies can support the Bitcoin open source ecosystem?
That's a great question. I think it's about it's challenging because I think that on one hand, you want to be able to identify what obviously it's like you're going to contribute money somehow, right? And so you want to find a way to have the greatest impact and to advance Bitcoin. And to do that, you actually have to have a lot of knowledge about Bitcoin to be able to say this is valuable or this is a waste of time. And it's quite often a judgment call, right? It's like an opinion, it's because it's like any other investment decision of it's speculative. You don't know if it's going to play out that way or not, or if this person's going to be productive and contribute a lot, or if somebody's like going to surprise you if like they drop a white paper on the mailing list one day that just like blows everyone away and they're like, wow, I didn't think of this at all. So I think that short of having let's say a native Bitcoiner on staff who's like directing where funding should go because they have intuitions about it from understanding Bitcoin, there's great organizations like Brink, for example. I know Spiral. I don't know that Spiral takes outside money, but OpenSats, so where you have like a board that is native Bitcoiners who are going to be able to direct that money productively on your behalf. So, there's a great division of labor there. And I think that's one. The other would be like maybe the company's software itself should be open source. And so that way your in-house developers can get into this mindset of they're part of an ecosystem, they're going to contribute upstream, and that they're not just like in-house enterprise developers doing proprietary software. But it's not for all developers. Like some developers just don't like doing open source, and I get it because it can be it's a different culture. But yeah, that's my answer.
Do you think that institutional investments determine whether Bitcoin becomes the planet's preferred currency?
I think so. I think that when we look at where is the world's capital today, it's very decentralized in the sense that there's lots of different financial institutions out there. You can point to some big ones, but even they're not like they don't control the whole system. The only institution that controls the whole system is the Federal Reserve. It's the central banks. And arguably, the other central banks don't even matter. Like the European Central Bank or the Japanese, they don't matter. It's only the Federal Reserve because that is the world's reserve currency. And so they're able to completely control the whole economy. So that's where, to me, like if Bitcoin, if all it accomplishes is replacing the Federal Reserve with a decentralized monetary system, and every layer above that remains exactly the same, I think we've accomplished the mission. Now, have we fulfilled the full vision? No, I don't think so. Right? Like I think that everybody running their own node and everybody holding their own keys, like that's the full vision. But in terms of this Bitcoin ethos of fix the money, fix the world, I think that if we replace central banks with the Bitcoin network, then we've gotten to that accomplishment.
What do you think the role of stablecoins should be?
I think that they're a stopgap measure and that they're really great for people who live outside of the U.S., don't have access to a dollar bank account. They essentially, they're using their local currency, and their local currency is backed by the dollar. And so their local currency is losing value against the dollar, and the dollar is losing value. And so it's like, well, it actually would be an upgrade for them to use the dollar and to abandon their local currency. And it also provides a foothold for them financially where, okay, so let's say you're saving up your stable coins. Then if you have enough economic security at that point, you can start saving up Bitcoin. But it goes back to that volatility point of like, if Bitcoin, without that foothold, then they just don't have the economic security to ever get into Bitcoin. And then with stablecoins, it's very easy to get into Bitcoin. So it's I think that from a liquidity perspective, it actually benefits Bitcoin to have stablecoins out there. But I also just think it's a temporary bridge to the world we're going to. It's not something that's permanent.
We'll do a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Real quick. Who are some of your Bitcoiners in the space?
So Michael Goldstein, my fellow co-founder of the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute, Bitstein, my best friend here, I had the honor of meeting Steve Lee pretty early in Bitcoin as well, and he's been a great mentor over the years. And I think though that in terms of the newest public figure that I feel like I ideologically align with the most has been Michael Saylor. Not to be too much of a fanboy, but I feel like he kind of got it very quickly. He's got conviction.
Okay. Quick question. If you could leave our listeners with a single thought about Bitcoin, what would it be?
It would be that you can peel this onion for the rest of your life. There are so many layers to Bitcoin, and the more you learn about Bitcoin, the more you realize how little you know about Bitcoin. So don't get comfortable just having a surface understanding. Dig into it if you find it interesting. But it's also maybe Bitcoin's like cars, right? Like not everybody's a car person. Not everybody's like wrenching on their car on the weekend. So, if you just want to use it for savings, that's okay too. But I think that, given like the philosophy behind it, I feel like people should be more excited about it than they are about cars.
Well, that was our last question. Thank you so much for coming on the show. How many
questions did we get through?
I think we got through about 17.
Okay, that's a low score. Okay, all right.
But I asked you about the bouncy house, so we'll count that as 18.
It's okay.
No, you did great. Thank you for coming here. Where can our listeners find you?
At Bitcoin Pierre on X.
Great. Well, I hope to have you here again. And Presidio Bitcoin, you're always welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a beautiful location.
Thank you.